Well, hello, and thank you for joining us for today's webinar on interactive distance learning for IEP institutions in case of emergency. I'm Dr. Mary Claire DiGiacomo, and I'm the Assistant Executive Director at ACCET, and I'm going to turn on my video just to say hello for a moment, and then I'll shut it off. Hello. It's good to see everyone who's registered for this webinar, and I'm going to turn it over to Maya for her to introduce herself, and then we'll get going.
Oh, gotta fix the camera first and foremost always. Hi everyone, my name is Maya Rasman and I am an accreditation coordinator here with ACCET. I'll be one of your presenters today and moderating the Q&A. So thank you for being with us, and I will turn it back over to Mary Claire.
So as we prepared this webinar, we realized that Zoom and the internet, it's under heavy duress right now. So that's why we have not used the video portion of this too much. That's why we were calling in with our phones, just trying to get it so that the audio quality is as good as we can make it, so that we can go through our presentation, share with you a lot of information we've pulled together for today. And then as we've mentioned, this is being recorded, and we will be sharing this video out to our members. We'll post a link to it on our website, and we will also post the presentation itself, the PowerPoint, together with a resource document that is fairly extensive. So you will have access to all of this, and it should be posted by Monday on our website. We're going to kind of hold questions until the end, and as Maya said, she'll be moderating the Q&A. I see folks are saying hello, and in the chat, we'll be using that. So thank you. If you join the group, make sure that you just say hello so we can see that folks know how to use the chat. And then just a quick comment before we get started. This presentation, as it says on the title slide, it's in case of emergency, and that's kind of where we're at right now, is doing something that we didn't really anticipate having to do. But we've got some tools and guidelines that we think will help, some information that we think will help for you to pursue IDL. And with that, what we've done is we've included a lot of text on our slides, and we're going through the information fairly rapidly just to try to get as much information to you as possible. We're kind of not following the traditional instructional design that we would encourage folks to use in the distance learning world. And so with that, we are going to get started. And just say yes in the chat if you can hear me okay. Just want to make sure everyone's listening and can hear me okay. Okay, great. Very good. It's kind of like being in a black hole. So it's good to have some interaction, and that's something that Maya is going to talk about later in the presentation. So thanks for your responses so quickly. All right, so today we're going to cover parameters for IDL. Take a look at some questions that you should ask yourself, the regulatory requirements, and then we'll take a look at guidelines for creating a distance learning environment. We'll look at technology, communication tools, content, and assessments. And then we'll cover some resources. We'll share those resources regarding federal guidelines, just some general resources, IEP specific resources, and then resources for instructors. And there is a lot out there. as we go through and you have questions, go ahead and just post them in the chat, and then we'll get to them at the end. And we will get going. So first, what you need to consider is distance learning the right choice? Is it appropriate for your students and for your subject matter? Will your students and faculty be better off with a distance learning experience? Or would it be better to temporarily close the school? It really depends on your students, your faculty, and then what you're teaching. I shared with another group that one of our schools was in Puerto Rico, and of course Hurricane Maria devastated Puerto Rico. And what they opted to do, of course, they didn't have technology. Fortunately, we have technology right now. We have the internet. We haven't lost our power. We have a way of connecting. But they chose to close their school temporarily for 40 days. And they stayed in touch with their students by having administrators and instructors, a core set being at the school, and then others going around. So this is a different time, but where we can't have any kind of like social gathering. But they thought because of the types of programs they had also, that it was better to temporarily close. And a little more than 70% of their students did return after those 40 days. Will all students currently enrolled be able to participate, access content, and complete assignments? So do they have what they need in order to enter into the distance learning world, and will they be successful? So we'll take a look at some of the SEVP guidelines. There are right now, and this landscape is changing, and we'll talk about that too, almost on a daily or at least weekly basis. They have flexible guidelines that apply to students who are currently enrolled in a program of study. It's not intended for new or initial students who are outside the United States. I know that this is under discussion right now. It's intended to ensure that non-immigrant students are able to continue to make normal progress in a full course of study. And in some instances, students enrolled in ground-based programs at campuses that temporarily close could participate in IDL until the campus reopens. This is on a temporary basis during this coronavirus threat. So it's temporary and students who are currently enrolled. SEVP intends to be flexible with temporary adaptations. In all cases, schools and students should document any decisions made and be able to provide that information to SEVP upon request. So that's something that's important, that you need to document any changes that you're making. And SEVP does require those procedural adaptations to be sent to them. That must be submitted to them 10 business days of the change. So you can go ahead and make that change. You don't have to do this beforehand. But if you make the change tomorrow, then they need to be notified within 10 days of what that procedural change is. If you're going to use IDL, if you're temporarily, this is for IEPs only, going to a temporary new location, you need to notify them within 10 days. And ACCET is asking to notify us as well of any of your procedure adaptations. Some schools have already sent us emails. We'll be getting a reply back out to you if you haven't heard a response from us. If you sent us an email, just letting us know the changes you're intending to make or have made, We've also developed a form that has been sent to the primary contacts at the institutions, whoever's listed in AMS. So that form, if you've already sent us an email, you don't need to complete that form. However, from this today forward, we are asking you if you are going to make a change to complete that form and let us know. We'd like to stay informed. These are the requirements that SCVP wants in that notification. Must include the school name, physical locations affected by the change. If planning to provide online instruction, you need to include the mode and classroom setting. How the school will seek to provide oversight of students. The name of programs of study and classes to be taught online. And the projected length of time for online instruction. And if you're planning to provide instruction at alternate physical location, you need to include how the school will offer instruction, provide oversight, adequately offer DSO services to students, seek to ensure students maintain a full course of study, and the projected length of time for that alternate instruction. And just keep in mind that SCVP maintains the right to conduct out-of-cycle reviews to ensure compliance. So make sure that you're documenting everything, maintaining good record keeping and reporting, and your reporting requirements consistent with implementation of that approved plan. And this guidance, again, applies to students who are currently enrolled in a program. Communicate with ACCET. You can ask us questions. We'll leave our contact information, and then you can contact anyone at ACCET with questions. And as I said, we sent a form to the primary contact. So I'm going to go on. Christina was not able to join us, so I'm going to continue on and talk about technology, and then Maya will take it from there. So for technology, some of the need to have for instructors, they need to have access to a computer and a reliable internet connection, speakers and a microphone. They need to have an online delivery platform, and we'll talk more about some of these in the next slide, including the online delivery platform, some ideas that may help you with that. And visual support, for example, this PowerPoint is a visual support. You need to be able to track attendance and grade recording tools. So if there's already an online grade reporting tool, that's great. If there's not, you need to be able to figure out how they're going to be tracking grades, possibly just using an Excel spreadsheet, and communication tools. And we'll talk more about attendance, grade recording, communication tools in a little while. Some nice to have for instructors would be a good headset, a student portal, and some of you may already have a student portal, and a learning management system. Learning management system would be a great place where you'd be able to share content, and oftentimes attendance and assessment and grade recording tools are all in an LMS. At this point, if you don't have one, it would be difficult to get up to speed to do something like that quickly. And that's really where we're at, is to do something quickly. But there's some ideas that we'll share as we go on regarding that. Some more need to have for instructors. Okay, so we're going into the detail about online delivery platforms. So for example, Google Classroom. Google has a lot of great tools. Google Hangout, for example, would be great for being able to have group chats. It has a video capability. There are all kinds of tools out there, but Google is good. Zoom, this is what we're using for this presentation. Zoom does have free accounts. They have a limitation of 45 minutes for each meeting. So that would be something that it's pretty intuitive to learn how to use. You can share your screen so you could share a presentation. It also has recording capabilities all built in. And so if they wanted to teach a class and a student missed it, they could share a video. And if they were to do that, they could post that video onto a YouTube channel, for example. Maya's going to talk more about this later. Adobe Connect is another product that's a paid product, Skype, and then YouTube with chat enabled. And then for visual support, PowerPoints, lots of videos out there, TED Talks, Khan Academy, that's another great tool. There are a lot of good videos out there that instructors could share. And again, Khan Academy is another good source. Some nice to have for instructors. Student portal. Some institutions do already have this. It tracks attendance and grades automatically. And so if you have one, that's going to be, that would be great for you to be able to move forward with IDL. Learning management system, as it says, it's more of an investment. It's also not just in dollars, but in time at this point. It's a great place to manage content and assignments and discussion boards. Blackboard has a product called Course Sites, and Course Sites is free, and that's a place where you can have, I believe an institution can have up to 10 courses, and you can pretty simply create an online course to share content, online assessments, and it has a gradebook built in too. And then Canvas is another LMS. Just some suggestions. Some need to have for students. So students need to have computers, a reliable internet connection, speakers and a microphone, and then tools for communicating with other students and with the instructor. And Maya's going to talk a little bit more about things like discussion boards, and I previously mentioned something like Google Hangout. I mean, there are a lot of kinds of tools, and students are very adept at communicating with each other using technology. Some nice to haves would be a nice quality headset, and as we've mentioned before, a student portal and a learning management system. And with that, I am going to turn it over to Maya, who is going to talk about communication.
All right. Thank you so much, Mary Claire. Here in the communication section of our presentation, we're going to be kind of covering three major tenets here: the communication between institution to instructors, instructors to students, and student to student. So remember that for ACCET, what makes interactive distance learning different from e-learning is that interaction between the instructor and the student student to student. So it's not just a student watches a video and completes a short quiz at the end, because that would be a purely e-learning scenario. There is that fruitive discussion occurring in both of those other channels there, instructor to student, student to student. So what we're going to do, we're going to break this down one by one for each of these three and kind of cover the key points. So we're going to start with instructor training. And this is huge. This is an emergency situation. People are being thrown into things that they're not comfortable with, they've never done before. You know, everybody's scrambling to try to do their best for their students at this point. So this instructor training piece kind of reigns paramount here, and making sure when we're thinking through decision points here of synchronous, same time, same place, same channel, all signing in 10 to 12, 10 a.m., 12 p.m. every day for this course. Obviously, with different time zones around the globe, we could see how this could be a bit challenging, or asynchronous, like we said, where they're accessing the content on their own time, but still within a structure of a course. So whether it be module, week-based, whatever that structure may be, that is still in place, but the student has access to that content and is completing the learning activities within a set time frame, but not all at the same time at the same place. It's imperative to instructors with years upon years upon years of experience with IDL, still have challenges from day to day, especially with technology, different student demands. It's a whole new world. You can be the most wonderful face-to-face instructor, and this is kind of like starting over in some ways on day one. And everyone's in the same boat at this point, so it's just expectations are different, but it is key, and that's why we've included quite a few resources at the end that will help us kind of some direct, here's what you should be doing, teaching methods wise, and I'll cover some more of these as we go through. What the expectation is around interaction with students. I can't stress enough on this point of interaction with students on communication. It's kind of interesting right now in our world. The main challenges that are faced by an online student, whether it be e-learning or interactive distance learning student, really do parallel the challenges kind of we're all feeling right now. The main complaints always in going through an online course is that you feel lost, you're confused, you don't know where you're supposed to be going, and honestly, you just kind of need a little more help than usual in making sure you can reach your learning outcome in the same manner. So it's extra vital right now that some expectations are set around what those interactions with students look like, as far as we'll get through many different communication reporting requirements and such, but just knowing what the instructor can be doing, what the expectation is, so that that student isn't feeling lost, they're not lost early, and they continue on a path to success throughout the whole course. Also, what the need is for assigning classwork and homework virtually, what the technology requirements will be, what content and online resources, again, what the balance of power is, what the responsibility is, and who is taking ownership over that, what role does the instructor have, how much academic freedom do we have at this point, and kind of all of these same discussions we're having in face-to-face content at many of your institutions and reign in this world as well. And then we'll look at kind of thinking through how assessments might need to be adapted in this area for this time. Really making sure, like it says at the bottom there, it takes self-discipline and time management, no matter what the scenario. So given that there are just so many different demands going on right now, it's kind of an extra burden on everyone, and everyone's doing their best, everyone's making it through. But just knowing it can be a difficult scenario for a student who's never learned in this avenue, this channel before, to have to move to it as well. So making sure both the instructor and the student need that self-discipline and time management. And going to the next slide here. And it's kind of hitting on clear expectations. Structure and expectations and communication are kind of really the triad there of what will make an online program work. All of those need to be very, very solid in order for your students to experience success. And so making sure, again, kind of the whole idea of the instructor's day has been turned on its head as well. Like, what does in-class versus out-of-class time look like at this point? How are they being compensated for those hours of work outside? What is the expectation from an institutional level around the time of response to student emails? Just kind of thinking through all of, here's what would happen. What does a daily check-in look like at this point? What does the weekly meeting look like? What does staff professional development look like? Just kind of thinking through and making sure those expectations are clear to your instructional staff, and while at the same time affording flexibility and knowing kind of, again, triaging what needs to be done now, what can be done, but in a modified manner, and what we need to look at further down the road when things return to normal at some point. And around virtual office hours is a really good practice, just having that dedicated space, because imagine that I don't get what's going on feeling that you are able to see face to face and able to hold students' hand and able to help them through. Imagine that becoming all of a sudden 22 different emails from your students, because that's what will happen if that dedicated line of support isn't there. When and where to post course syllabi, handouts, recording attendance, like we talked about, completion of academic work is really one of the main tenets that we use in IDL, making sure that if you have an LMS, you're able to see their seat time. You can see when they logged in. You can see what content they're accessing. But then also knowing if you are taking attendance in a live session, how are you accounting for those that attend a pre-recorded? How do you capture their attendance beyond, are you including that? And just kind of thinking through on your different parameters of what assessment means and how they earn their grade. Just making sure, again, kind of translating, here's what it is on ground, here's what it's going to look like in this world. With reporting grades and attendance, luckily many of you, I think Mary Claire hit on already, or use student portals already, so that might not be as much of a concern as far as a procedural manner, but again, just kind of taking a step back and thinking about the layers to that grade, the layers to that attendance. And for an IT support resources, staff, faculty, and students, it's critical kind of at each, like we're saying, where does the student turn to for help when they have a problem? What are we deeming as an emergency? What is the best channel for them to get help? Often on an LMS, in different programs, you're able, here's the dedicated section where I would reach out for IT support, at my institution. Many of you are working in very, very small institutions where a lot of you are wearing 47 different hats at this point, and there's just so many demands, and kind of thinking through just adding this too, though, who is the student turning to? Who is the instructor turning to? Who are you turning to at that point? And just making sure there's a plan in place so that that's clear. So again, you don't end up with instructional frustration either from the instructor or the student or the institution as a whole. Again, it's a lot about managing expectations, knowing we're learning within the reality that is what it is at this point, and this is our context. That's what education is all about, making sure we're doing things that are meaningful and relevant within the context we have. So it's that in action, but just making sure everybody's expectations are clear and able to be met to our best of our abilities at this point. So going to our next slide here. I'm gonna keep here with instructors to students, like we said, setting expectations. What are those technology requirements? How are they being told students? Do all your students, taking it a step back, do all your students have laptops? Are your students, even if they do have a laptop or a tablet, iPad, whatever it may be, are they still possibly accessing content on their cell phones mostly? What does that look like? How do they account for turning in work in that world? Are you allowing for example, kind of photo submission of a handwritten assignment? But if they don't have word processing, just kind of these basic affordances we take for granted on day-to-day with some of our students are able to do, just kind of thinking about what does turning in a paper look like at this point? What does this mean in this world? And having some wiggle room and some freedom, perhaps we'll get to this in a bit, but having some freedom for your students to be able to demonstrate their mastery in some different ways, and making sure, ultimately the learning objectives are still reigning supreme, but you'll need some flexibility in getting there. And it will be uncomfortable. It may not go well, but that's everybody's in this together at that point. So just making sure through those technology requirements, do they have internet access? Starbucks is closed. There aren't libraries open. You can't go to McDonald's to use the internet. Are they in limited bandwidth capacities? Just all of those things need to be thought through case by case and deciding what's best for each student for their continuation, and kind of what's best for you as an institution to preserve the value of your product and your name and your reputation and the wonderful services that you establish for your students and work so hard to build, making sure that is able to continue. Just with attendance, we've talked about kind of thinking through so your students is clear and what changes need to be made to syllabi to make sure how is that being redistributed, what does that look like now. We talked about participation, asking questions, discussing, discussion forums, submitting assignments on time, frequency of communication with instructors, and online office hours. So making sure all of that is apparent to students. All right, and moving to the next slide. All right, and then looking further a little bit more here for instructors to students, participation on live sessions. We'll be covering this quite a bit, but just all the different ways and what they're going to be doing actually during class, chat boards, cold call, just to garner participation from students there as far as just kind of going back to the basics of what are basic questioning techniques, kind of again become paramount in this world because that's one of the main arsenals that your instructor has to kind of check in on the student, make sure they're getting it as they're going along. With cold calling, not necessarily cold calling, but just thinking of different ways, whether it's just a simple asking the question, pause, 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 calling on somebody. Your instructor is knowing their students so they can scaffold questions so that the students are able to feel successful, asking targeted questions based upon current levels so that the new students will feel comfortable participating, because that's key to making them feel bought in ultimately to the course and able to be as successful as possible in those discussions. Thank you, Jason. We see Xfinity and Comcast are offering temporary free internet service. Thank you for stating that. That's good enough. Thank you. I hadn't heard that come through the wire yet. Also, as far as class group emails, text, WhatsApp, a lot of your students, like Mary Claire hit upon already on this. So if we're looking at doing group work, which again, I caution in a situation like this, since there's just so many demands in everybody's situation across so many time zones, it can be a nightmare under a regular circumstance to have dedicated group work projects outside of class. But, you know, again, if expectations are clear, if time is set aside, if instructors are willing even to set up specific times throughout the week to meet in smaller groups, make sure that so those discussions can happen, again, that they're objective driven in the discussions so students know what the point of what they're doing is at every single step. That's really going to help with the overall design and making sure that, again, it's not just, okay, what are we talking about all together kind of feeling, which can definitely happen on different discussion manners. We talked about online office hours, posting assignments, posting topics. We'll talk about both of those in great detail, and how to submit assignments when. We'll talk about that as well. And on to the next slide here. And then student to student, like we said, this is really the 10 of the 3 communication channels. This is the one that can kind of easily fall off sometimes. You know, instructors are communicating with students, students are interacting with content, but the student to student really needs to be nourished as well, and making sure whether that's a live session with the chat board, recognizing the comments that are coming in. And I see the very specific regulatory comments that are coming in, and Mary Claire will hit upon those if they haven't been sufficiently answered yet as of now. So we're going to keep working on that. So thank you, Brenda, for the replies on those. We will address those during the Q&A as well. But just making sure that they feel included ultimately and what that participation looks like, whether it's in the chat, whether it's on a discussion board, whether it's group work with, like we've talked about, if it's how and when it's being done, how it's submitted, all of that, just making sure, like, again, very clear, here's what you're doing on this together, if it ends up being that way, but multiple different channels available for students to communicate. even if it's a simple email chain or different app discussions that can happen on most LMSs. Those of you that would be working with LMSs, again, not required by this at this point in time. LMSs, the instructor has the ability to set up different groups within the portal, within the page, and have specific access rights for different folks, so that is another affordance that could happen in that world. Right, and then on to the next one. All right, so then to content. Again, these are some major questions a lot of you have been grappling with over the past couple of weeks and are hopefully working your way through as best as you can. Like we talked about, can you still meet your learning outcomes? Can you still deliver the level of education that your institution is known for? Obviously, there's some major changes going on, or is going online not possible given your specific scenario and ultimately going to hurt your business more in the long run? That's a major decision that everyone is dealing with. How are we going to quickly adapt instruction to do so effectively? When we're looking at this, when we're triaging, what can you bucket as able to remain the same? What needs modifying? What must be completely reworked or scrapped, and what to prioritize accordingly? And what do instructional delivery and learning activities look like now? Again, some changes will be necessary, but you need to have that structure and that clear direction in place. As with any instructional method, with any delivery, with any educational setting, the daily learning objectives still drive your course, not the modality or the technology that's available to you. Like Mary Claire talked about, there's multiple different systems out there, different ways to accomplish the same end goal, but the end goal is that your students are mastering objectives, and that's it, right? All of this needs to be reworked, but that's ultimately the driving factor. Here are outcomes. Here, how are we going to backwards plan to make sure that this is still going to happen? You don't need all the bells and whistles. Again, they can help make your life a lot easier in some cases, but if you're not accustomed to it, it can be a nightmare to handle as well. But you do need to think through, like we said, what can stay the same. I know many of you already use PowerPoint materials from your publishers that may be able to stay consistent. However, what needs to be updated, something as simple as what does board work look like now? I know there's many tools, apps out there that you can do screen share for different drawing features, but again, that might be something your instructors are, you have very different comfort levels across your instructional staff with technology. So even something, if they wanted to draw something on a regular old piece of paper, take a picture of it, put it in their PowerPoint, you know, that still gets us to where we need to go at this point. Will it be 100% as effective as it would have been in face-to-face? You know, maybe not at this point, but it's still kind of doing what it takes to get your student where they need to be. And then what needs to be scrapped completely? I know I've been to institutions where they have class sets of text. So what is being done in those scenarios? Are there certain book assignments that are no longer applicable because of that? What kind of activities, thinking through your learning activities of your instructors in the day-to-day setting and thinking what can be tweaked or what needs to be changed and or what we need to get rid of completely. Obviously, a lot of, in this world, it's nice, especially with the video capacity that hopefully will be available to as many students as possible, you know, for your different practice across speaking, reading, listening, grammar, all the different facets are able to be assessed still and able to be corrected and able to have that face-to-face, hopefully, interaction in that way and provide the constructive feedback, you know, in a way that some of our voc schools are, you know, having different struggles with thinking about how they're doing labs when they have labs every single day. How are they doing having electricians practice wiring from home? That's not happening, you know, just so obviously huge problems in both worlds. Everybody is scrambling, but it is interesting to think about, you know, how much you still can accomplish once some routine is set in and able as quickly as possible to get that done and work through. Heading to our next slide here. All right, and then with delivery, what we've talked about, if it's synchronous in real time or asynchronous, not in real time, or both, making sure it's accessible for all students. Mary Claire talked about posting videos to YouTube. It is really nice in that way on YouTube because you're able to transcribe pretty easily. So making sure all of your students, no matter what you don't want any barriers to obtaining their ideal learning situation, making sure everyone has the same capacity to learn as they were in face-to-face. So that's one way where the text could be available easily, making sure, like we talked about, different students with different access issues. You guys are, thanks Natalia, we're talking about some different hotspot options there. Thank you for sending that. Just making sure, thinking about that accessibility challenge is huge. And again, manage expectations. I garnered my master's completely online in instructional design and technology, so it was online education done in an online format, and I had instructors with PhDs and 40 years of experience, and I've seen the good, the bad, and the ugly in that ideal scenario where they had nothing but support from the university, whole dedicated departments, all of the knowledge and access to whatever tools and plenty of staff, that whole world, and still major challenges, right? Like, this is a crazy situation for everybody, a life-changing situation. So just knowing that expectations, and never in favor of lowering educational outcome expectations, but just knowing and being flexible and knowing that it will be a struggle and has been a struggle, and kind of the barriers that you'll face. And then, like we talked about, just that structure beyond in-class time really does have an elevated role. The amount of behind-the-scenes work that an instructor or whomever the instructional lead is, depending upon what the scenario is in your institution, the amount of work that goes into an online course is quite a bit of prep time, because you can't just, do it live and just kind of wing it, which none of your instructors I know for ever do, right? Because everybody's lesson plans are thoroughly developed all the time. But just knowing, like, it just takes so much work to kind of think through each detail of whether it be a submission, whether it be where I anticipate issues with a student. But like we said, you aren't in the class to get the feel of the room in the same way. So just kind of thinking through, again, what does that instructor's day now look like? What are the expectations around that? Something as simple as, how are they, back to communication a little bit, when a student submits something, and it has to be by email if you don't have an LMS, are you setting up different emails for each class? What does the subject line look like? What is the expectation around formatting? Just kind of all these considerations that when we think about, like, turning in a paper, what does that mean now? Because that's kind of something, again, where here I go, I turn in my work. What does that mean? How do we make sure nobody gets lost at that? And then we've talked a bit about interaction, quite a bit, but just some more ideas on real-time polling, discussion boards, chat rooms, apps, collaborative tools, the Google Suite, a lot of Google Docs, a lot of folks can get on that, Gmail suite there, and wonderful collaborative tools. But then really too, like we talked about, basic questioning techniques really become critical, because it's learning to read the room in a new manner. It's your number one check-in to make sure folks are with you. It's the way that communication is kind of going with your class now, and making sure, just kind of harkening back to those basic pulse reading techniques in the room. All right, next slide. And here we go, kind of to sum up on completing, when your students actually completing academic work. It's really driven by clear expectations, explicit direction, extra support. So I'm going to think, what are students submitting? How are students submitting? And what can instructors do to preemptively help? So looking back up to clear expectation, format, parameters, we've talked a bit about that, just really being known. Nothing is worse for a student than not knowing what's expected of them. Most of your students, we like to think most of our students want to meet expectations, right? Like, that is, they're not out with a vendetta to harm their educational well-being, we hope, right? It's our kind of basic fundamental premise here. But just nothing will drive a student more crazy than having an unclear expectation. So if it's, oh, we're going to do a final project and we're going to present on what you learned during this class. You know, honestly, I've had experiences like that, making sure, again, it is as objective driven, as explicit as possible on that, making sure you know, okay, what is the time expectation? What is the length expectation? Just the regular expectations, making sure that doesn't lose its salience within this setting. Then on explicit direction, too, how are students submitting procedure, deadlines, consistency? Consistency is key in online learning, especially in LMS setups too. If I'm doing an asynchronous route, this is where I go to access a video. It's always the first line. Here it says watch video. I click. This is how I'm going to do this every single time. Here is where I go to access the content, some readings or any other, you know, look at this handout. It's always in this format. It's always the next line on my screen. I know to click there. I feel comfortable. I always go about everything in the same exact way every single time. Here is when I go to do my discussion post. Here it's a nice link to that, so I can click over to that. Or if you're doing a synchronous setup, you know, here is every single week. You're just like as if they were breaking down your scope and sequence and breaking down your class outline. A really good technique is to send out a weekly email at the beginning of the week. Here's what you can expect, again, with language appropriate to the level of the learner that your instructor is working with. Here's what you can expect for the week. If in-class assignments are due at this point, discussions are due at that point. When I say that point, another key to success is making sure something as simple as time zone is clearly labeled. If you say it's due, if an instructor says due Friday, does due Friday mean due 11:59 Thursday, or does it mean due 11:59 Friday? Like, that will drive some of your students crazy because they'll want to meet your expectation. It is not clear to them what that is. So thinking through, making sure we know it's Eastern, Pacific, whatever time you're talking in, just those small details. If you're afraid your instructors are over-explaining, all of your instructors are very used to just being so incredibly helpful for your students and explaining and doing what it takes over and over to get them where they need to be. But especially in this online world, some of these, especially with different level learners here, just knowing that you are not over-explaining ever. It might seem crazy to you to have to, for your instructor to be writing out step by step how things go, because this is what we do every week. You know, everybody needs that reminder each week. Like, make sure it is the same, make sure it is explicitly told. Another good practice in online, in IDL on an LMS usually, or, you know, if you can go to synchronous, you have a week 0 usually. Obviously, we aren't afforded a whole week at this point to explore the platform, but if maybe we do a day 0 in some of our cases here, and just take that time so the student is comfortable accessing whatever you're doing, practice with it, make sure they see here's where you go, here's if you need help, this is where you click, if here is how you write back with an email to me. Again, setting parameters around what an expectation around decorum becomes key too. Maybe your students are used to emailing in text language always, you know, that doesn't cut it, you know, making some of these conversations, again, that probably have already happened in the classroom. It's just a good reminder to have, again, in an online world where, again, students can kind of hide behind different things and, you know, are more comfortable talking and acting in a certain way, making sure that the academic standard is still upheld in that world is a good conversation to have in kind of a week 0 info packet where you're resending out the syllabi at this point, making sure everything that's updated needs to be and that your students being made aware. That's a good piece to have there, as well as just practicing with accessing different materials there. And then on extra support, looking to what can instructors do to preemptively help. Like we said, your instructors know your students so incredibly well, but they need to know what your students don't know before your students don't know they don't know it, right? Because they're not there, again, to hold the hand. They're not there to, when that student wants to just get that instantaneous help, that's not going to always be possible now. So just really thinking through step by step, okay, at this point, here's where the common questions are. Okay, at this point, here's usually, I know this might be an issue. And again, this is kind of trial by fire sometimes, and you learn and you implement it the next time, but just really, whether it's additional examples, prototype of past student work, that is very helpful in knowing here's what is expected of you. Here's a great example, right? That's a really nice way to foster that. And just for seeing those roadblocks with extra structure, like I'm saying, it's hard enough to get your students to master content and meet their objectives. You don't want your students to get frustrated on just trying to master being able to access your materials, right? Because that's going to just kind of cause a spiral, and they're going to lose buy-in quickly. So just making sure that's in place. All right, next. All right, and we'll kind of go quickly here through assessment. So we'll run over a little bit the questions, of course. So just kind of go quickly through assessment here. But how are your students showing mastery in a new environment? So the changes that need to be made to formative as you go and summative at the end, assessment. So formative, checking in on students becomes even more important, like we've been saying. The questioning, the hand raises, which we didn't get a chance to practice with. Like Mary Claire said, this is like crash course 101 here, so we're limited on time, but making sure your students participate in hand raise, just any kind of ways to get them involved as much as possible. More structure, more time together through that guided practice. That might have to be blown out a little bit more than usual, because when you move to independent practice, your students might need just, a little more support because you're, again, not there to help in the same capacity possibly. So just spending more time on that guided practice. And then on summative, it's key too that you mix it up so that your course doesn't get flat. We see that quite a bit. You don't want, we'll get to discussions in a second, but every single time, don't ask your students to reflect upon personal experiences, right? Because it makes, kind of have your instructors think about some fun prompts from time to time, because if every single time your student is just saying, here's what I learned, just kind of those basic questions, they can get kind of worn out on that. And so just making sure, again, they always access it in the same way. The expectations are always the same. They know how many they're doing. All of that stays consistent, but the actual content, make sure to mix it up to keep it from going flat. But as far in a summative way, though, here, making sure they have multiple outputs and really you have some freedom here to show that they get it. Again, depending upon their scenario, this might be a really great time for some academic choice and making sure, like we said, we need some flexibility in this. So maybe tests aren't always going to be the best option at this point. Whether it be the group projects, the journals, the presentations, the reflections, discussion participation. It's really making sure that you're getting multiple perspectives. And again, if you're doing kind of a one summative end of course project, maybe there are multiple different ways that they can show you that they got it ultimately. So this is a good time to have some of that freedom. All right, and next. And then we've talked a bit about when you're thinking about how you decide assessment, really making sure that you're aligning your traditional grading breakdown that you already had in your class structure, or do you need to rethink? So for example, participation. What is participation? Just like always, if a rubric is required, you need to grade students on discussion forum participation. How are you grading them on if it's in class? Live participation, right? There's thousands of rubrics out there now for discussion board presentation, but that's just a sample of one that we put in that will be in the instructional materials as well. But that's a good idea to think through what do each of our buckets look like now? What does in-class work look like now? What does that mean? What does participation mean? What do assessments mean? Ultimately, just making sure each of those components make sense in this world at this point. And making sure too, like Mary Claire said, with making sure your audio works, making sure that your students don't feel like they're in a void, a vacuum, where they're just submitting things and nothing happens. Making sure, again, the expectation is clear about what kind of feedback will be provided and how, so that your students know what to expect. If it's a minor assignment, what feedback are they getting? How is your instructor getting them that feedback? What does that look like? Are they able to do an audio feedback on, even like in a PDF, you can add audio and they can speak to them on their assignment on there, or just different capacities, or if it's a whole group correction, what does that look like in this world? Just kind of figuring out so that your students, again, don't feel like they are just going into a void and not knowing what is expected of them. All right, and then last page. All right, and then for quizzes and exams, for assessments, this is another one where there's some choices that need to be made between adapting your current model so that their academic integrity is upheld. Think about it, time limits. How are you determining how long your student has on an assessment at this point? Again, would that be a synchronous session? Understanding that open book might be more prevalent. How are you making sure your students aren't using their book? You're not in many cases at this point. And so it's key to, if possible, if it's able to be adapted by the resources that you have from different publishers, if you're able to adapt those questions in a manner so that it's not a simple copy from the book type answer. And so kind of thinking about how that plays out. And then also just another resource here from Google. Many of you might have used already, but that is not the right link, but we'll get you the right link. But another one from Google, just making sure that those are self-checking. You know, it's really helpful when it's a self-evaluating exam. So then that takes the burden, you know, one less thing. Your teacher might not have to grade in that way, right? So it's easier for them. Boom, there's your score. It's filled into the form, you know, comes out in a spreadsheet format. So that might be a good option to kind of alleviate that burden so they can open up for more time. Again, ultimately, kind of the big question that we're all grappling with here is how you're trying to still make sure that your content is authentic and your assessments, all of your learning experiences are authentic, meaningful, and relevant in a scenario which may seem anything but. So just doing everything you can to encourage that participation, that student buy-in, and reworking what you have and what you know to make that effective as such. So with that, I saw some more questions. Stacy, great question. We'll get to that in the Q&A. But with that, Mary Claire, turn it over to you for final consideration.
Thanks so much, Maya. That was great. So just to kind of sum it up a little bit, we're going to look at the summary. We have some resources, and then we'll have Q&A. And we should wrap it up in about the next 10 to 15 minutes. So make sure IDL is the right choice for your students and faculty. Choose the appropriate technology that best meets your student and curricular needs. And support your faculty and staff with the necessary resources. It's a big change, as we've been talking about, as we all know. I mean, our world's really changed a lot in the last few weeks, and it will continue to be like that for a while. I can remember one time I was at a school and where I work, and we did a huge initiative going into some technology, and instructors needed to learn whole new ways of doing things. And one just was really frustrated, and he just said, you know, I don't want to learn anything new. And this was many years ago, and I never forgot it. And I just looked at him and I said, that's what we're asking our students to do every day. And I know it's frustrating and difficult, but that's kind of where we're at. So just, you're a student of this. And so we're learning some new things going into the IDL world. And another thought is to make sure that instructors reach out to students who are kind of gone silent. So if students aren't participating in discussions, discussion forums, getting behind in homework, just an email or even a phone call connecting them to let them know that they're being missed can make all the difference in this online learning environment. You need to, just a reminder, contact SEVP regarding your plans. We talked about that, and there was a posting. We'll go over some of the postings in the chat too, but you need to stay in touch with them. There is that 10-day requirement to let them know, and include that required information as we reviewed earlier. And then let ACCET know your plans too. And We did send out a form, but if you're, as I mentioned, if you've already emailed your information to us, that's fine. You don't have to complete the form again at this point. And then, of course, we'll be just communicating with institutions. We'll be posting things on our webpage. We're all actively working on this, trying to make sure that all of our member institutions have good information, and just knowing that that landscape is just changing all of the time. These are some, I'm just going to go through these in 2 minutes, some of our resource slides. We will have these, all of these are in a PDF and a handout, and I'll post that on the website. And we'll also post the video, the link to the video of this webinar. And we will also post the PowerPoint itself. So you'll be able to download that if you're interested. These are some resources for the federal guidelines. And as we've talked about, it changes quickly. I think Brenda provided with an update already since we've done this presentation. Here's some general resources. Inside Higher Ed and Chronicle, they just have tons of articles now out there. There's just a lot of information out there about how to teach online quickly. It's, you know, it's emergency IDL basically. And for instructors, tons of information out there. A lot of universities have instructors who are just providing free webinars on how to teach online and best practices. There's just a ton of information out there. It's really wonderful to see how the academic community is coming together and providing a lot of free resources. So these are just some articles that we thought you might find helpful. And within some of these articles are, you know, embedded links to more articles and more information. So there's a lot of information out there. And then some IEP specific resources for you.